Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in the House and speak during the debate on the Opposition Day motion calling on the Liberal government finance minister to reveal all assets he has bought, sold or held within all his private companies or trust funds since he became a finance minister. We all heard and we all know about the Prime Minister's statement in the House on November 1st, 2017, where he says that sunshine is the best disinfectant. In his quote, the Prime Minister was referring to his election pledge, promising to provide Canadians with open and transparent government. His belief that his cabinet ministers would be above all reproach, and the best way to prove it was to be able to shine this sunshine on it and use it as a disinfectant. We all know about the multiple failures of the Prime Minister and his Liberal government have had when it comes to fulfilling their election promises. It's a terrible record of failure. They have disappointed many Canadians who believed in their campaign promises. They believed the deficit would only be $10 billion. They missed it by another $18 billion. The Finance Minister has for weeks now refused to use the disinfectant that the Prime Minister recommends to cleanse himself from the shroud of secrecy that clouds his tenure as Finance Minister. The Finance Minister refuses to come clean and tell Canadians about his personal wealth. And before we go on further, Madam Speaker, I will be splitting my time with a member from Calgary Shepherd. Mr. Speaker, our question, our concern, is has the Finance Minister refused intentionally to conduct himself under the open and transparent rules that the Prime Minister promised Canadians? Or has the Prime Minister A-okayed the Finance Minister's constant and continuous refusal to tell Canadians what investment he owns? Has the Prime Minister A-okayed the fact that the Finance Minister is using his position to enrich his personal finances and his family's firm? Is the Finance Minister willfully disobeying the Prime Minister? Or is the Prime Minister backing down, succumbing to threats made by the Finance Minister as he refuses to confess what he owns and how he is using Canadian law, or how he used it to enrich his own family portfolio? The Prime Minister talks about his family fortune, so it is possible that the Prime Minister understands his fellow multimillionaires' finance ministers' stubborn refusal to share with Canadians public the details concerning the numbered companies that the Finance Minister owns. Madam Speaker, this refusal to be honest and open is disrespectful to all Canadian taxpayers, to Canadian public, middle-class Canadians. No one can trust someone who refuses to tell the truth. Worse, the Finance Minister has been playing what we call silly games with Canada's Ethics Commissioner for 2 years. And Madam Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner, contrary to what the former member said, has found him guilty. I'm reading right from the nature of the violation that she printed: failure to include in a confidential report a corporation, one of his corporations, established in France, and an estimate of its value. Of course, it was that corporation that controlled the interest of his chalet in southern France. Failure to include in the confidential report his directorship of that corporation. Madam Speaker, he's playing these games with the Ethics Commissioner. He's playing these games with Canadians, and certainly that's why he belittled the NDP for joining together with Conservatives. I mean, I think every member of Parliament, including many on the Liberal side, are very much concerned with the direction they see this Finance Minister go. Canadians understand the process. When someone is named to Cabinet, they declare their assets, and the Ethics Commissioner helps the new Cabinet Minister sort out his assets so that the new Cabinet Minister is free to work on policies and government business without a conflict of interest. Everyone does it. Well, everyone is supposed to do it. It's actually easy unless you really have something to hide. You know, we've had a Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Paul Martin. He was also Cabinet Minister. He was Minister of Finance. Very wealthy man. His family was famous for owning ships. paying some taxes in Canada. These were massive ocean liners, sized cargo ships that operated all over the world. He placed his holdings immediately into a blind trust so that he could be free to be finance minister and then prime minister, because Canadians had a reasonable assurance that he was not writing laws aimed at enriching his personal wealth. But the current prime minister and his rich finance minister, they don't seem to understand that. Or if they do, they don't care. Paul Martin took his job and his wealth seriously, more seriously than I think this prime minister and finance minister do. I think both of them have come into Parliament fairly recently, and they just maybe aren't certain, thinking there may be two laws for different types of Canadians, the wealthy and those not quite so fortunate. The current Prime Minister was born into his family fortune, and he considers it a privilege. Madam Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner makes certain that these types of issues shouldn't come to the front. And when they do, and there's concerns brought forward, she judges on them. And she's already found him guilty. She's already going through another investigation with him and the Prime Minister and other cabinet ministers. Canadians don't need or want to see the details of every asset, but Canadians want the watchdog to be satisfied that these rich politicians do their job without a conflict of interest between the work they do and their personal wealth. And Madam Speaker, for certain, Canadians want to be sure that legislation that comes forward from position of finance minister is not going to be legislation above and beyond what actual normal legislation looks like. It isn't legislation that is going to enhance the wealth of the finance minister. Now, Madam Speaker, that's part of the concern of Bill C-27. That's not why we're here. We're here because we want to see what corporations, what assets he held in those 2-year period, and he is refusing to tell Parliament. He's refused in question period for weeks now. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, the Paradise Papers, released a few weeks ago, unveiled $250 billion that is owned by Canadians in offshore tax havens where no Canadian taxes are paid on the investment profits and these holdings, the profits they generate. Yet instead of chasing these investments and the rich Canadians who own these $250 billion, the finance minister and the prime minister think that it's better to raise government tax revenues off the backs of the working class, the middle class, the lower income people, the small businesses, the farmers, the waitresses, the fishermen, and more. That's why Canadians are upset by this. That's why they see a double standard. Canadians are upset because they see one set of rules for the finance minister, another set of rules for every other politician, and then they are the brunt of the attacks that the finance minister is bringing down. And this is disgraceful. We're watching the 1% right here in action in the House of Commons, Madam Speaker, on that Liberal side, and they take care of their own. Madam Speaker, this morning I chair the Public Accounts. And this morning on a different issue, the Auditor General brought down a report. He brought down a report on Phoenix Papers. He brought down a report on the Canadian revenue, and he brought down a report on Syrian refugees. Part of what he said in his report is disappointing. He says, I was hoping that I would be able to talk about something other than results for citizens. I keep delivering the same message that the government does not understand its results from the citizens' perspective. He went on and said, it appears that our message is not being heard by a whole of government. Getting these requires a concerted effort across government to understand and measure the citizens' experience. I think we have the same issue with this government. They simply don't understand that the people that are being governed are asking for certain responsible measures to protect them from the people that are governing. That's what the Ethics Commissioner does. And Madam Speaker, that's why we need the light to shine on the Finance Minister so that we can see exactly what the House has been asking for. What corporations did he own? What corporations benefited from the measures that he's put in place? For all we know, he could own shares in any number of companies across this country that the government has lent money to or granted or given to. Bombardier, marijuana grow plants. I mean, all kinds of things. All we want is the information. Canadians deserve it.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Don Valley West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I have great respect for the member opposite and his work on the Public Accounts Committee. But there was a suggestion in his discourse just now that somehow there maybe should be different rules for members or ministers who have been successful or members or ministers who do not have money. I am solidly one of those in the latter group, that I am not wealthy, but I think that the rules of ethics apply to me equally as they would apply to any other member, and a minister and a member are the same. So I would ask if they're actually proposing that somehow the rules should be different for different types of people who enter this chamber, and whether or not they trust the Ethics Commissioner to ensure all rules are followed.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Well, Madam Speaker, thank you for the question. I thank my colleague for the question. You know, I know that there are different types of rules because I served in Cabinet. And I know that in Cabinet, the level of accountability, I think, was greater. I think we recognized, whether it was that we recognized it or I can tell you former Prime Minister Harper, you know, he would come in and he would say, listen, we need to be above reproach. I don't even want you taking a free ticket to a hockey game because you need to be above reproach. Buy your own ticket. And so we lived with that type of standard being set. And, you know, Madam Speaker, you know, the member from Winnipeg Centre asked the question earlier about the Canadian Wheat Board. I can remember, because I own a farm, where I was told that I shouldn't ever take out a cash advance because I may end up voting on the Canadian Wheat Board sometime. And so we, absolutely not. The Ethics Commissioner told us, and we didn't. Madam Speaker, I thank you for your...
Allow for more questions, but maybe the member will be able to add that into his next response. Questions and comments? The honourable member for Brandon Souris, is it? Sorry. Souris Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his comments and his words. Madam Speaker, the Parliamentary Research Branch has conflict of interest rules for federal legislators. And in it, Madam Speaker, it talks about techniques of control. 3 of them are: 1, disclosure, which we know that this minister didn't do. Number 2 is avoidance, which we are still trying to figure out exactly whether he avoided or not. And the 3 is withdrawal, in which really talks about recusal. I'm just wondering if the honourable member might be able to comment on any one of those 3 points as to what he sees this minister has done.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Well, it's what he's done and it's what he hasn't done. So what we know he hasn't done is, Madam Speaker, we know that he has not claimed a certain corporation in the south of France that owned a beautiful chateau in the south of France, didn't want Canadians to know about it, didn't want the Ethics Commissioner to know about it. Failed to report it and was found guilty as charged by the Ethics Commissioner, and he paid the fine. So we know that's one thing that he didn't do. One of the things that concerns me in what he did was in the bringing forward of the new legislation on Bill C-27. I'm not going to get into the benefits of Bill C-27, the positives, the negatives, but all we know is that with that one piece of legislation, this minister stands and stood to profit massively. We know that his family, company, expertise is around target benefit plans. We know they have been used to help formulate the target benefit plan in New Brunswick. So he hasn't reported his own corporations. He hasn't reported his own assets to the Ethics Commission. He's withheld that. But he's come in the back door with legislation, and it may be all right legislation, but it's legislation that his company is going to benefit with. Well, I can tell you, when I signed as a minister, we sign saying the code says that you will not bring forward anything that will benefit you financially or your family members. And it may say friends. It may even say friends. I can't recall right now. So here is the problem. This is why all the opposition parties have joined together and said, why won't the Prime Minister allow this son?
I'm sorry, I tried to allow the member some additional time, but time has run out.